Resuming debate, the honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am honoured to pay tribute to, on behalf of my constituents, to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, who passed away after 70 years of devoted service to the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth, and certainly to Canada. And her death has certainly been a devastating heartbreak for millions of people around the world. And very poetically, on the day she died, I noticed on social media that there were many photos of a double rainbow that appeared right outside of Buckingham Palace, the very day that she passed away. And much of the popular commentary is perhaps it was a message from God that our Queen had been reunited with her Prince Philip, her husband of over 70 years, who she called her strength and stay. So that was just a lovely, lovely thing to happen on that otherwise very devastating day for many people. And there certainly was, as many people have seen, a sort of a magical sense about the Queen. And Peter Mansbridge actually recently said on his podcast that the monarch and the Queen was sort of a mix of fairy tale and history. I thought that was put very nicely. And certainly for our family, it was certainly part of our cultural heritage sort of discussions that we would have. And there was certainly an admiration and appreciation for Her Majesty. I know my maternal grandmother mentioned that she used to cut out photos of the Queen in her younger years, see the outfit she was wearing, what she was saying, how she was acting, what she was doing. And it's almost the modern day equivalent of Pinterest. I know there's likely many of us who have pinned an outfit or two of the younger royals. And so my grandmother was doing the very same thing 70 years ago out of admiration for Her Majesty. And my paternal grandmother, who greatly admired the Queen and sort of would always affectionately tease us to show her love, if we were dressed up for church or for a family gathering, she would say, "Oh, is Queen Elizabeth coming?" And so it was her way of giving us the highest possible compliment that we looked very lovely. And certainly my mother, like many women her age, greatly admired Princess Diana. And of my generation, of course, there are many new younger royals, notably the Princess of Wales, Catherine Windsor, who really sets a standard of decorum and professionalism and respectability that those before her have done for, well, over 70 years. But beyond perhaps a distant admiration, it wasn't something that was necessarily a cornerstone of my professional life or personal life until I swore an oath of allegiance to the Queen, which all members of Parliament have to do in order to become members of Parliament. And really, when I said those words, I, Raquel Dancho, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the enormity of the responsibility I was assuming hit me like a waterfall. And that's where the clock really started to turn and think about, what does this really mean? What is my duty that I'm swearing an oath to uphold? And certainly I look to the Queen as an example. She was certainly the living embodiment of our ancient institutions, our symbols, our parliamentary traditions, our culture, our history, and certainly, again, our Canadian and Commonwealth values. And I saw it in swearing my oath that I was swearing to uphold those traditions and those values. And certainly it's not always easy. The Queen made it look very easy, and she did it for 70 years, and certainly led by example. And members of Parliament, of course, have our own duties to uphold those values and traditions. And really, Queen Elizabeth II was like no other historical figure. Her impact will likely be felt for many lifetimes to come, and it'll likely never be repeated, what she was able to accomplish. And we know she was born in 1926 as part of the world's greatest generation. That was defined and shaped by hardships of the Great Depression and the World Wars. And she personified those moral standards of the Western world and Judeo-Christian values. And when I found out she died, I did feel a deep sense of sorrow, but also a feeling of sort of some frustration, an anxious feeling. And it was as though the standard bearer of those values was now lost, and our ability to uphold those values in society was slipping away. And the ability for us to prosper and to thrive, which depends on those values, right along with it. We know the Queen stood for dignity, for hard work, for doing one's duty, for embracing public service. She never complained. No matter the struggles of the day, whether public struggles or those in her personal life, she always had a stiff upper lip, as the British say, and maintained her calm composure with grace. She was resilient, strong. She never played the victim. She never exhibited narcissism in any way. She was dedicated, stately, honest, decent, and was an absolute lady of decorum, good taste, and propriety. rarely, if ever, having a misstep in her 7 decades of her reign. It's truly remarkable. I think that's why millions of us are going to miss her. We need examples like this for ourselves, for our children, for our politicians, for our communities. And in 1947, on her 21st birthday, of course, famously, she did a radio broadcast heard around the world where she made a vow, where she said, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." And she stuck to that vow for the rest of her life. I think it's pretty difficult for anyone to imagine making a promise at 21 and then living up to it with such perfection for 70 years. And she always had poignant words of wisdom for all of us. I really loved her Christmas speeches, and I'm really going to miss those. In 2008, she said, "When life seems hard, the courageous do not lie down and accept defeat. Instead, they are all the more determined to struggle for a better future." And then during the early days of the pandemic, she shared with all of us, "We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again." And she was absolutely right. She was always calm and composed no matter what was going on in the world. She was really a port in the storm, so to speak. And she was truly an extraordinary role model for her people, for members of parliament, and certainly for women. She became queen with the world watching at the tender age of 25, and many underestimated her abilities. Many thought a young woman would never be capable of burdening the enormous responsibility of carrying over 1,000 years of constitutional tradition and evolution that makes up our system of government. But she did, and she became one of the greatest world leaders we've ever seen. And although she was a servant of tradition, she was also a modern woman in her own right. During World War II, as princess, she volunteered as a truck driver and a mechanic, making her the first female member of the royal family to serve in the military. And her coronation was a significant moment for women in history. Women at that time rarely saw women in positions of power. And after years of war, women at that time were, of course, being encouraged to go back home, be dutiful wives and mothers. But the Queen was expected to know world issues, to be able to converse and advise the mostly male leadership at the time. She was expected to travel despite having young children. She was a working mother before it was fashionable. For 70 years, it's her face we've seen in the halls of power, something women have rarely seen. And as was written in a recent Globe and Mail story, to quote, "She was also the rare woman who grew old while holding public office. The Queen, after all, could not be fired for having children or going gray. Instead, in official portraits, her countenance was updated to mark her advancing years and accruing experience. She aged into her leadership as an example of being unflappable and resolute." And in this hyper-partisan world, Madam Speaker, I'll just conclude. There were a few quotes that I found I think were very poignant for us to remember as we go into this new parliamentary session. In her 1957 and 1974 Christmas broadcasts, respectively, she said, "It has always been easy to hate and destroy. To build and to cherish is far more difficult." And she also said, "We may hold different points of view, but it is in times of stress and difficulty that we most need to remember that we have much more in common than there is dividing us." And just to conclude on this very solemn occasion, I just want to conclude on a happier note. That's something that's comforted many of us in the recent days, is that she certainly has been reunited with Prince Philip, her 70-year-plus husband, her strength and stay. He was her strength and stay, Madam Speaker, and I think that certainly she was ours. And we will miss her, and I know that I will certainly miss her. God save the Queen.